and lead to this allopatric speciation. I say both. All of these things are reasons that could lead to allopatric speciation. Our founder effect, the different mutations, the genetic drift, as well as the various selecting pressures on each side of, in this case, each side of the mountain. Okay, so let's look then a little closer at sympatric speciation. So with sympatric speciation, they're still living in the same area. And so they have, for some reason, developed into different species, even though they're still in close contact with one another. An example would be what we have here. Okay, we have these beetles here that eat bittersweet root, and they're called tree hoppers. And they eat bittersweet root versus butternut. Okay, an example here would be their mutations. Okay, so this would be a case of different mutations. Okay, one of them ended up being able to feed off of a different food source, and so that has resulted in success for them as well, and so they have eventually become a different species. Okay, let's look at another. So for another example here, I have these fish. Okay, and this is an example of human impact. So these fish, we've got two kinds of fish over here. Okay, we've got a blue fish and a red fish. And these fish live in the waters of Lake Victoria, Africa. Okay, and normally, in normal clear water, blue light will penetrate much farther. Okay, and if we think back to a little bit about what we remember about light, we see what is reflected back at us. So blue light penetrates a lot farther. That's why deep oceans look blue. Okay, however, in cloudy water, the blue light is absorbed by the sediment. And so the red light is what penetrates deeper. So what we have here in the case of these fish, okay, is that eventually over time they have evolved into two separate species, essentially a blue species and a red species. And that's going to be dependent upon their ability to see each other and their ability to find food. Okay, so what has happened over time is in this lake has become cloudy. And this cloudy lake has, sorry, we're not zooming here. Okay, so in this cloudy lake here, I have a lot of sediment, and that's where our human impact comes into play here. Okay, that sediment didn't come naturally; it came from humans. Okay, so we have affected the environment here, and so in this cloudy lake now, the blue light is staying up here at the top. Okay, so the blue light is penetrating up here at the top, and so that's going to be a more beneficial environment for the fish that are blue. Okay, and so in the shallow water, the blue fish now are easier to see one another. It's easier for them to see their food. The red light is penetrating deeper, and so it's easier for them to see one another and their food. And this is where those types of selection come into play. So now we've got this intersexual selection that's going to play on this. Okay, the females are selecting a mate. Okay, down here in the bottom, the females are, it's easier for the female to see a red male. So if this is a female fish, it's easier to see this red male versus to see this blue male. So if she's selecting for a mate, she's going to select a red mate, okay, which eventually then over time has led to, what's happened here, where we have these two separate species. Ooh, sorry about that. Okay, so we have these two separate species over here, okay, of blue fish up at the top where there's more blue light, so it's easier for them to see one another. It's easier for them to see their food. And these red fish down at the bottom. But they aren't really physically separated from one another. They are still very close to each other. Let's look at something that happens more commonly in plants. Okay, so we have here what's called polyploidy. And again, this is more prevalent in plants. Okay, so poly means many. Okay, and so polyploidy is a form of instant speciation. Okay, instantly this happens. If this happens, this plant can no longer interbreed with the original plant. Okay, so a polyploidy situation has more than two copies, more than two sets of homologous chromosomes. So in this picture here, we are what's called diploid. Up here we have two sets of chromosomes. Okay, these polyploidy plants here end up with 3 or 4 sets. Okay, they have more than 2 sets of homologous chromosome, which is usually a result of abnormal cell division, a lot of times in mitosis or metaphase 1 of meiosis. So this abnormal cell division results in this increase in chromosome number. Okay, and that's going to result in installation. Okay, another form we have is what's called autoploidy. So in autoploidy, the number of chromosomes double in the offspring. Okay, so the example we have here is, here's the original plant. Okay, so I've got my original plant here. Okay, it was 2N, so it had 14. And here's my new plant, okay, with 28. And if you notice in the picture the size difference, okay, a lot of these are usually end up being larger, stronger plants. So in an autoploidy situation, okay, so in autoploidy, I want to make sure you can still spell autoploidy. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. So in autoploidy, the number of chromosomes have doubled in the offspring. Okay, and usually that's due to a non-disjunction problem. Okay, okay, this is called autopolyploidy. So remember, a polyploid had more than 2 sets of homologous chromosomes. Okay, with an autoploidy situation, the number of chromosomes in the offspring have doubled. So what we have now here is the original plant. Okay, and so the original organism here was 2N. Okay, it had 6 chromosomes. It was at 2N. Okay, and then there was the polyploidy happened. So now it ends up with 12. So now when it produces its gametes, the gametes are the same as the original. And usually the point of meiosis is to cut our chromosome number in half. Okay, and it did. It cut the chromosome number in half from 12 to 6. Okay, but since we had that polyploidy situation happen, okay, they were not back to the same as our original organism. Instead of cutting it in half from our original organism. So now the offspring, when fertilization happens and 2 of these gametes come together, now we have an offspring that's 4N. And this plant, plants can self-fertilize. So this would be an example of autopolyploidy. What we have here is an allopolyploid. Okay, so an allopolyploid we've got 2 different species here, species B and species A. Species B starts off with 4 chromosomes. Species A starts off with 6. Both of them are starting off as diploids. Okay, but we're going to end up with a hybrid here from both organisms. Okay, and it will also be a polyploid. It will have more than 2 copies. Okay, so what we have here is our normal gamete from species A. Okay, here's our normal gametes. Okay, species B would have 4 chromosomes. Our unreduced gamete. Okay, so here's our problem. Okay, so here is our problem with meiosis, our non-disjunction. They didn't separate properly. This comes in contact with species A, which is a totally normal gamete. So now I have my hybrid. Okay, and my hybrid, when my hybrid goes to reproduce, okay, it can reproduce with this normal gamete from species A. Okay, because I have these unpaired chromosomes here from species A. Those can pair up with a normal gamete from species A. So now I result in a viable, fertile offspring. So now this offspring is viable and fertile. It will survive and it can produce babies. Okay, and it has an allopolyploid, more than 2 copies of each chromosome. Okay, it did not do it by itself though. It's not an autoploid situation. Okay, it came from 2 separate species. Another way that sympatric speciation could happen would be due to chromosomal rearrangement. Okay, what we have here is an example of grasshoppers. Okay, and these grasshoppers, they look very similar. They're both flightless grasshoppers, but they are totally different due to a chromosomal mutation. There has been chromosomal rearrangement. Another example would be something called triticale. That is a plant. Okay, and it is a result of artificial selection done by humans. Okay, so human manipulation has rearranged the chromosomes on this plant. Okay, and so that has resulted in a sympatric species. Giant pandas and bears are considered sympatric. Okay, they have a lot of similarities, yet also a significant number of differences that they are 2 separate species. Okay, so as we continue on, I'm going to try something different, and I told you I'm experimenting on you guys. I'm going to try to kind of add the pictures as we go. I've had them already pulled down and in there, but I'm going to see if that speeds the process up for me a little bit. Okay, so bear with me a little bit here. So we're going to talk now. Okay, so let's talk now about what's called adaptive radiation. Okay, so in adaptive radiation, we've got another, you might have to pause while I do some of this so that I can spell things for you. So in adaptive radiation, I am forming a new species, okay, but I'm going to form a new species by one species inhabiting an area. So one species will inhabit the area, and that will then evolve into several new species. So the example we're going to talk about here are Darwin's finches. So this is just kind of a map of the islands. And so one species adapted the area, and that then evolved into several new species. If we look here at all these different islands, okay, you can see where they have various numbers of species of finch or bird that are on each of those islands. So let's look at how exactly that could have happened. Okay, so I have my finch population. That my finch population would have originally come from the mainland. Right? So here's my finch population on the mainland, and they have flown over to Island A. And so on Island A, we still have exactly the same species, okay, as we did on the mainland. And so now, okay, over time, we have some of these finches that decide they're going to go ahead and they're going to fly to a different island. And so they take off and they land over on this next island over here. And so on this island, okay, now I have a new finch. So what happened here at number 2, okay, is speciation has happened here. I was at finch type A here on the mainland. Finch A flew to the island and has evolved eventually into finch B. Finch B now flies over to this other island. So now on this original island, I may have a mix of A and B. Okay, and over on the new island, I have B, type B finches over on the new island. So now though, okay, this will continue to happen. And so they'll continue to fly and they'll continue to spread around. But also keep in mind that these finches can come back to their original island that they were on. Okay, and so when they come back to their original island, now I'm going to have a mix. So what has happened here? Okay, again at number 4, I had speciation happening again. So that's how I got finch C. So I had finch A went to the island, finch B went to this island, eventually became speciated into finch C. Okay, finch C, some of those guys may have come back to this first island. Some may have moved on out here to this second island. You notice where the radiation part is coming from here? Okay, so we are radiating out to these various islands, okay, which can eventually result in something that will look similar to this. Okay, I can have some more finches here that have come back. So again, I had speciation occur here at number 8. Okay, so these finches have finch C went over the island. Speciation occurred right here. So there's my speciation. Okay, into finch D. Some of those went back to island number 2. Some went back to island number 1. So now I'm getting a mix of finches on these various islands. Okay, if you'll notice here, the first original island would probably have the most variety here of finch. The further out they go, the less variety you're going to have. Okay, and so why would we have this happen? Okay, because eventually we'd have something that would look very similar to this. Okay, and so now I've got all of these islands that have a wide variety of finches on them. Okay, and as we are here, okay, let's talk about then why this would have happened. Well, again, back with our why. Again, this is essentially allopatric speciation. Okay, they are geographically separated. Okay, so they become different species. Okay, you don't have the species mixing in the same area until they return. Okay, and so as they radiated